Welcome to Ampersand, a new podcast series from Penn Arts and Sciences, where faculty from different disciplines discuss a topic they have in common. As part of this series, we're bringing you conversations with the new Dean of Arts and Sciences, Mark Trodden, who will be speaking with faculty from a range of disciplines about their research and topical issues in their fields of study. In this episode, Dean Trodden speaks with John MacDonald, professor of criminology and director of the Master of Science in Criminology program, about how urban design, data, and technology can inform crime prevention, and how the social sciences can help solve some of our toughest societal issues.
So welcome, John. It's great to be speaking with you. I've been impressed by your work and by the Department of Criminology in general for a long time now. Penn has the only criminology department in the Ivy League, and one that's grown since its establishment in 2003, which I just think is remarkable. It's particularly known, has a strong reputation for innovation in quantitative techniques and the application of big data, so very fitting today, and has introduced truly innovative academic programs, some of which you and I are going to get a chance to talk about later on in this discussion. The department's also known for the Crime and Justice Policy Lab, which partners with governments and nonprofit organizations to find research-based solutions for preventing crime, advancing the justice system, and other complex social problems. And I know that in your own work, I've had a chance to chat about this on occasion over the years, you study a lot of these kind of nuanced social issues. And so I wanted to start out by asking, a sort of overarching question. What first got you interested in criminology, and what were some questions that really inspired you to pursue this research?
I'd say what first got me interested in the field was my original interests were actually to go into kind of federal law enforcement. I took one criminology class as an undergrad, and I thought this is really fascinating. Maybe I'll go to graduate school, and while I'm in graduate school, I want to become, stereotypical FBI agent. And while I was in graduate school, I realized that I was actually really interested in the research aspect to it, the idea that you could do social science research that actually affected policy. I came from a family of engineers. They were all into math. I never thought I didn't really like math because I didn't see the application.
I'm going to try not to hold this against you.
And then I discovered statistics, and I realized, actually I do like math. It's just, I like it when it actually is trying to tackle like a real world problem. And so in that graduate program, I kind of shifted my mindset, and then a couple of things that really drew me to specific topics. I've always been kind of, what you would call an urbanist, someone who likes to explore neighborhoods, see settings, and I started learning more about different theories that explain why place affected people. And that actually just resonated with my own sentiments. And then I was really inspired to try to do that kind of research, really research that was pioneered initially at the University of Chicago by some criminologists in the sociology department in kind of the mid-1900s. And it got more popular also in our field, and that was kind of my initial kind of push into the field was I wanted to do something around place and neighborhoods. But I initially actually started off studying a lot of other kind of random topics, looking for the right opportunity. So I focused on racial disparities in the juvenile justice system, using kind of complex statistical models for the time to look at how people got processed through the system, police use of force, and then kind of the factors that led people in and out of violent crime. And then finally, my opportunity for kind of place-based research came about 20 years ago.
That's amazing. I mean, I've followed the things you've been doing in Philadelphia in particular for the last few years, and it's always struck me just how, it's such a template for how a place like Penn, which is by many people perceived to be completely separate from the city, in fact, can have real world impact. And, I think, I started in math, as you know, and I always describe what I did as moving towards applying the mathematics. I think we have different definitions of what applying means in this case, though. So, your answer segued nicely into something else I really wanted to ask about, which is, you've spent a lot of your career looking, as you say, at how neighborhoods and public spaces and even things that you wouldn't normally associate with this kind of question, design choices like lighting or trees or public art, can impact the prevalence of crime. So stepping back from that, I mean, you live in a city and you tackle these problems on a daily basis, but stepping back from that, if you were to design a city where the natural environment minimized crime, what would that look like? What would be the main features of that?
There would both be features of nature and buildings themselves. So if you kind of think, there's a bunch of different theories that try to explain this, but I won't go into like a theoretical diatribe. Just say the practical things are you have to kind of, you do need a mixture of nature. There is a psychological element to making a place feel more pleasant that helps people want to be outside. And people are the best guardians of space. And also mixed use. So you want to have commercial and residential mixed together so that people have places to walk. In many ways, what you want to do is kind of recreate the urban design of, your kind of medieval English city, if you will, or a colonial city in America where people had to be out and about and kind of, didn't have these big separations. You're seeing some of that in this kind of move towards new urbanism. The other thing you need is mixed income, because you don't want to segregate people based on poverty into the same place. It limits economic opportunity. It leads to other problems that are well understood, the concentration of disadvantage. So you kind of want to have this kind of mixed income, mixed use, mixed amenity kind of design.
Let me follow up on that and ask you a sort of sciencey question about it. I can definitely imagine, just having lived in cities myself, that, you observe a city, you observe the places where the crime is most prevalent. And certainly I can just see with my own eyes how the correlation in the existing data would imply the things you said. Are there examples where the experiment has been done, where interventions have been made? I mean, I know you've been involved in some of these, and show a change as opposed to just observing that, that's the way the conditions are where crime is prevalent.
Yeah, that's, one of the areas that I've had a lot unique opportunities to actually do field experiments and try some of these things out. Because as you said, a lot of these things are kind of we call observational studies, but basically studies where you observe things after they've happened, and then you do correlations. And, the advantage of a field experiment is you can actually test it and see if the effects are there. So I've worked on greening vacant lots. Originally, that was with Charlie Branis, who at the time was in epidemiology. He reached out to me after he saw some of my work on business improvement districts and crime, and he said, hey, there's this green vacant lot initiative happening around Philadelphia. Some community members and the director of the program thinks that it might help reduce crime. Is there any reason you would expect that? And I said, yeah, it's called crime prevention through environmental design. And he said, yeah, I have some data. We can look at it before and after. And that led us to eventually doing an actual full-scale experiment done also with him, a randomized trial of remediating vacant housing in Philadelphia, and most recently studying the upgrade of street lighting. In every case, we tend to find some evidence that physical changes to the built environment actually do help reduce crime. They don't solve it, but on the margin, they make a big difference. And in the data, you see things from residential surveys. People say they're more willing to socialize with their neighbors now. They feel better about this space. So it's pretty consistent with, with the basic underlying theories.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, I think, like I say, walking around cities myself, I definitely notice the correlation. It's interesting to know that there's actually a causation that you can point to. So I have a question that's really about, I think anyone who's ever thought about the kind of work someone like you does, or even crime in general, would have this question. So, certainly technology as part of, law enforcement and how we think about crime is prevalent these days. And, if you look at popular culture, from Minority Report to CSI, and I have my own British favorites like Waking the Dead, popular culture has this fascination with, and actually a fear of, I would say, the use of technology to enforce law and police crime. So do you watch these kinds of shows? What do you watch? What's most fun for you? And when you do, and if you do, what are some common misconceptions about policing and technology? What are the legitimate concerns we should be aware of and actually worry about?
Yeah, I tend to like the kind of thriller, detective stories, things like that. But yeah, I've watched those kind of CSI type of programs. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So technology on the one hand, first I'll say that TV shows tend to exaggerate how well the technology works. even things like, crime scene evidence. It's never as pristine as you see it in the show. I mean, if you think about kind of the chaos of a crime scene, it's not often like the evidence is really preserved like it would be in a lab. So, I mean, I think same thing with forecasting. With Minority Report, people think, oh yeah, these algorithms are going to get so good. Human behavior is really complicated. So I have a degree of skepticism. Where I think there is the danger, though, is where the technology gets so automated that the human discretion gets removed. And then you can have all kinds of problems with false positives. I'll give you like a concrete example. Imagine there's a technology out there, an AI. I'll use AI because everyone now uses that term. But there's an algorithm that's going to forecast where the next burglary is going to happen. And it's pretty good on average. Maybe 80% of the time it's right. That's really good. There's no way it's going to be that good, but let's just pretend. A police officer knows that. That officer then gets dispatched to that area and then just stops someone and searches them with no constitutional reason because they're near the place where the burglary is supposed to happen. That's where you have problems, is where people start suspending kind of their own. You still have to have a reasonable suspicion or ideally even probable cause for a police officer. In that context, you can see how people would get profiled unjustly. That's just like a simple. And then you could carry it forward to things like if we're using forecasting tools for sentencing, and people think that they really can predict this well, then there is a risk. Even automation now is coming along where it comes to crime report writing. So on the other hand, those tools, if they're used right, can be really helpful, because if the automation helps write a report more accurately, based on someone's voice, their interview, than a poorly written report by an officer, or if the algorithm's really good at looking through someone's criminal history and coming up with a better profile of what they would need in terms of treatment, then I think the technology can be a real benefit. But the key issue is you have to have human decision making there to kind of prevent the kind of automation that can create problems, the false positives.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about applying big data techniques in other fields, everything I worry about there seems incredibly heightened when I think about applying it in this kind of high stakes public setting. I wonder, how good we will ever be at getting the right training data sets for algorithms like this and that are free from bias, and also how we separate out things that are essentially correlations as opposed to things that actually have a causative nature behind them. And so do you have any other examples in the use of technology in crime prevention that you know of where those issues have been tackled well?
I would say in the area of kind of probation assignment, there's kind of increasing evidence that a good machine learning model is a very effective way of assigning people to effectively very little intervention, taking low-risk people. And judges, probation departments are naturally going to be hesitant to do that. So in that case, we even have some experiments that compare when people are randomly assigned based on effectively a machine learning model to low-risk probation versus the usual treatment, that they do just as well as opposed to having to go meet with somebody on a weekly basis. I think in those kind of areas, there's been some success. Another area would be there's some work in sentencing where judges are given suggestions on ranges, and that I think the evidence is a little bit more compelling that you might reduce some of the individual bias of judges, basically trying to pull them in closer to their colleagues.
Right.
So, but I agree with you, there's all kinds of risks. And there's also, just because it's big data does not mean it's a good model. That's where I fear, we used to just call it regression, and then it became big data, and then it's machine learning, but it's really just an adaptation on a complicated regression model, most of these. And then now with large language models, which is just imputing words, and obviously it's super powerful, but I think people can get duped into thinking that it's much better than it actually is.
So I want to switch gears slightly. You've been working with the Philadelphia Police Department for quite some time now. I'd love to know how that relationship started. It's an unusual thing for someone in a university setting to be doing, particularly somewhere like Penn, at least it seems to me. And more broadly, what role can academic research play in supporting the needs of a community, in addition to, building knowledge, which is what we think of as our bread and butter?
Yeah, so my start with the Philadelphia Police Department initially was when Charles Ramsey, goes by Chuck, when he became the police commissioner, he was interested in changing the boundaries of the patrol lines. So Philadelphia had been using the same patrol boundaries since 1976. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, but one of the reasons was because they, every time they wanted to change the patrol boundaries, people who had a good patrol assignment with less work were not interested. There was a kind of a seniority thing. So I end up talking to one of his assistants and kind of just coming up with a very simple algorithm, which is essentially taking all the calls for service and then rebalancing the number of officers assigned based on the volume of calls. And then he adapted it and kind of built. So that was an entry. It was just kind of a, pro bono public service. Then the work around vacant lots, we needed data. And so then I, had a relationship with their program and planning office around data, getting data from them, and then talking to them about ideas. And then about 8 years ago, they were really interested in trying to adapt mobile phones. Officers all have mobile phones, personal ones, but they didn't have a public issued one. And they realized you could text people alerts. They could do a better job writing down reports, including taking video evidence. And at the time, they could do that on their personal phone, but really, technically they're not supposed to because it's subject to subpoena and all kinds of issues, privacy issues. So we did a little experiment, myself, Aaron Chalfin, and Greg Ridgway, with the police department, where we randomly assigned some officers to mobile phones. Then the pandemic hit, which kind of put a cramp in some of its utility. But what I'll say that came out of that was pretty clear. There were a bunch of advantages in terms of just officers. They were more happy, collection of evidence from that experiment, some preliminary evidence that they're better solving cases related to gun violence. So that relationship formed, and we could get into this later about how that led to a master's degree, but part of that made me realize that they were really receptive to trying to learn and figure out how to not just adapt technology, but other things that the department was open to. And so it's been, I could say, a 15-year journey with different commissioners, some having more interest than others. And then, we now have the benefit of Commissioner Bethel, who has a lot of experience working on research projects, not directly but indirectly, and kind of understood the value of them.
You mentioned the Masters, and I'd love to talk about that because, so you direct the Masters of Science in Criminology program here, and you recently helped design the Master of Applied Criminology and Police Leadership, the MCPL program. And this was launched just around the time that I was becoming dean. And I have to say, for me, it's very exciting. I think it's a poster child, really, for how a place like Penn can both stay true to the things that are the core of our mission and have an outsized effect in the community in a way that I think everyone can agree is good. So this program is specifically created for police professionals. It's the first professional master's degree of its kind in the United States. And as I said, for me, it really just highlights Penn's unique ability to offer programs in criminology that directly benefit not only our students, and most certainly benefits our students, but also the region and its police leadership. And the launch was a lot of fun, right? You saw officers there in the audience for the launch who were actually about to go through the program. Mayor Parker was here, Commissioner Bethel was here. It was clear that there was a lot of buy-in, as you say, from city and police leadership into this idea. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about this new program and how it was developed and how it builds off, as you say, the department's historic work.
Yeah, so, a number of us in the faculty have been doing work with police departments, myself, Greg Ridgway, Anthony Braga, most significantly, his whole career. And so we're doing this work, we have it, kind of the field of evidence-based policing is developing. And the back of my mind, I always, thought it'd be really good to actually not just do the work with agencies, but try to get the leadership to understand the material better, to be not just consumers, but potentially even producers of new knowledge. And during my sabbatical year at the University of Cambridge in the UK, I got to see a version of a master's of applied criminology for police executives in the UK. And it was eye-opening. I was seeing, people coming through the program who were all of a sudden becoming champions for doing experiments in their own department, the pride they had. And that program actually started because of a town versus gown problem that Cambridge had. And so they created kind of this, professional master's degrees programs. But it was under-enrolled initially. But by the time I got there was, I think, 90 officers going through the program. And you could just see how it was transforming the leadership in the UK in the police services. And so I thought about that when I was there. I said, I'd really like to see something like this happen at Penn. It's different. We don't have a national service. We have, regional police agencies. And then, I was fortunate to meet Joe Neubauer and know that he was really interested in leadership development. And so, between our department, his interests, helping support it, and then having a commissioner coming back in who was really about leadership development, because Bethel had been outside of the department for several years in the school district and saw how principals were trained, getting master's degrees in leadership development. And, this is just not happening in American policing. And so, it was kind of a confluence of things that came together and set up kind of a unique opportunity. And, very bullish about it. We're starting with mostly Philadelphia police officers, but, we've got some regional reach already. And, I see this as something that's going to be transformative in the long run. We're going to have police chiefs, police commissioners throughout the country who feel like this is a degree that they should have gotten, or they'll send somebody from their department to, because you just kind of create a network effect.
No, I think the opportunity for scaling something like this is great. And, I'll say that as someone who was an undergraduate at Cambridge University more years ago than I care to say, maybe I just didn't know about it, but I definitely back then would have said that this town-gown divide was real, and that you would not have seen these attempts to connect to the community. And now the fact that we're seeing that at places like Cambridge and Penn, I think it's an incredible development that universities have started to see themselves as agents of change in the local community and beyond. And it's something that I hope we see continue. It's like I say, for me, it's been a lot of fun watching this develop. So I'd like to sort of perhaps end by stepping back a little bit. Everything we've talked about has been very focused, rightly so, on your personal interests. But stepping back, I'd like to ask, why do you think the social sciences matter these days as a broad sort of way of thinking about the world, not just for your field, but for understanding the challenges we face as a society today? And looking ahead, what excites you most about where the field is going? If you were a young criminology student coming up today, what research areas would you focus on?
That's great. First of all, in terms of why the social sciences matter, I think we live in particularly tumultuous times politically. And I think in those times, you really need quality evidence about what works and what doesn't. And the social sciences can play an important role in that, of providing, I'll say semi-objective. Nothing's perfectly objective. We all have our own biases that we bring when we're doing a project, but having a rigorous approach to looking at problems, analyzing the trade-offs. I think criminology definitely has a strength in that. Applied criminology, you could say the same thing with economics. Psychology, even though often people don't think about it in a policy space, can play an important role. So understanding in sociology in terms of looking at changes in social institutions and schools. So I think the social sciences are critical right now. And with the improvements including in AI, the ability to do higher quality empirical work is becoming more and more accessible to people. At the same time, they have to know what they're asking and if they're getting back the right information. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity to look at questions, especially things that are being debated in public with data and a much faster timeline than it used to be, 20 years ago. You can collect data. There's real-time data, open access data. I mean, there's a whole, it would have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a study that you can do now, for $50,000 just because the data generation has gotten so much better. So, you don't have to go download it from a specific computer, pay a RA to clean it. Like a whole bunch of things have changed. In terms of like where the excitement is, I think in the issue, I do think doing field experiments, trying to get out there with agencies, criminal justice agencies, social welfare agencies, and trying to apply rigorous science to it. People are actually interested in knowing what the evidence is when they're given the opportunity. And increasingly, there are leaders in different fields in criminal justice that have graduate degrees and are interested in having research at least play some role in guiding their policy. So I think it's an exciting time to be in an applied field.
And when our undergraduates come and work with you in criminology, do they get real in-the-field experience of the kind you're talking about?
Some, the undergrads that want to take advantage of like summer internships, they want to get some involvement in just the research production. Yeah, then we can draw them in. The Crime and Justice Policy Lab has provided a lot of opportunities for undergrads. And then they also get to understand kind of the mundane aspects of research, like coding data, going through transcripts. I had a project where we were scoring litter on street blocks, and then we had an intervention to clean up litter in Philadelphia. Well, I had an undergraduate through CURF, the summer program, and she, with several other people, including myself, drove around the city 300 blocks rating litter and got to understand like how the sausage is made. How do you, if you want to know something about litter, how are you going to, you have to develop a survey, then you have to go out and actually collect the data. And so, trying to get undergraduates more involved in that. I think it makes the social sciences come to life for them. It seems less just about theory or about learning what's, written in a text and understanding how that gets actually produced.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that our students get that kind of exposure at a place like Penn.
Yeah, I didn't have any exposure as an undergrad, any opportunity going to a small liberal arts college. So I feel like when a student's at a major research university like ours that's in a city, there should be opportunities for them to get involved in the knowledge production. Then they have a real better sense. One, some of them end up then wanting to go into graduate programs, but they just appreciate, okay, how did this information get produced?
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for taking time to do this. I've really enjoyed this conversation. One great thing about being dean has been that I've been going around and learning about things that are very far away from what I do, and criminology has been just a great example of that. So thanks for taking the time, and thanks for coming in today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This concludes the 4th episode of Ampersand, our new Omnia podcast series. Many thanks to Mark Trodden and John MacDonald for today's discussion. Be sure to listen to our next episode of Ampersand, featuring Dean Trodden in conversation with Bhuvan S. Jain, Walter H. and Leonore C. Annenberg Professor in the Natural Sciences, and the co-director of the Penn Data-Driven Discovery Initiative and the Penn Center for Particle Cosmology. The Omnia Podcast is a production of Penn Arts and Sciences. Subscribe to the Omnia Podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts to listen to new episodes from Ampersand and all of our podcast series.